All right, folks, here we are. We're here with Jerry Seabolt again. Our first episode was with Jerry, and Jerry, I think we've gotten up to 67 maybe.
66, 67 in that general area. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I had been running back and forth. I was working with Mercury Records as the head of promotion for the Smash division, which was kind of their pop label, so to speak, and turned into their country label as it was after our success with Jerry Lee Lewis. And had a gentleman named Shelby Singleton, who was the A&R director for Mercury in New York. And along about that time, Shelby, probably late 65, early 66, he was setting up headquarters and working with the Mercury office in Nashville. And he and I became kind of buddies on the telephone. I had never met him, as a matter of fact. He was from Shreveport, Louisiana, so that wasn't part of my history at that point in time.
Sure.
And he said, I'm starting a company, and if you ever get tired of working for this gigantic corporation, if you don't know anything about Mercury, they're owned by Philips they were owned by Philips of the Netherlands at that time, with the people who make Norelco razors on top of everything else. So it was a major corporation, and they ran it very corporately. So if you know anything about the arts, music as it were, the two different types of people. I was called on the carpet one time for not having my suit coat on as I was walking down the hall.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, it was really kind of cool. If you went to the president's office, you were required to make sure you were wearing a pair of pants and a shirt and a coat that were matching.
Ooh, that's pretty rough.
Well,
I'm sure that was
part of it was the standard at the time. The standard changed so quickly in the 60s. By the time, the first time the president of Mercury came to Nashville, Tennessee, he was wearing a turtleneck with French cuffs and a Nehru suit. Times changed.
Yeah, absolutely. That's pretty groovy. Yeah.
So I had transferred down to Nashville to work in the Nashville office at Mercury, and when I got all settled in, I went to see my good friend Nora Wilson, who was with Al Gallico Music, which was a large publishing company. Nora had been on Smash as an artist, had one hit record called Hello Mama McCluskey, which was a kind of a British thing that he adopted to country.
Yeah.
And he said, hey, I bet you haven't seen Shelby since you've been here. And on a Saturday morning, he and I had rolled over to Shelby's office, and Shelby was sitting at his desk at about 8 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday morning, drinking a Jack Daniels and Pepsi. Nice combination. And we got to talking, and he just looked me dead in the eye, and he said, so when are you going to quit and come to work for me? And I went, he said, they've already paid for your move. So I don't have to reimburse you. And I said, what do you want me to do?
Yeah.
And he said, I want you to do what you do best. He said, we're a small company. We're getting off the ground. We've got a couple of things coming up here, and I need to get them played, and I need people to get out there and talk to the people at country music radio stations. Country music did not get the kind of attention that pop radio did at that time. Yeah. As I mentioned earlier, a good sale of a record was 50,000. Man, we were doing great with Jerry Lee Lewis, but he was the exception to the rule at that time.
Yeah.
Unless you were Merle Haggard, or you were George, or there were no Ronnie Millsaps yet. That's a later thing when I met Ronnie.
Yeah.
And so I said, so what will I be? He said, you'll be my national. And he kind of did this. You'll be my, making it up as he went along. Look, you're going to be my national field promotion director. There's an American Express Card Diners Club, Carte Blanche, if anybody remembers that.
Oh, yeah.
And he said, let's see, what was the guy's name? Donnie. Herb Schucker was his corporate. Store and pulled out $2,000 and said, here, this is for places that don't take credit cards. We'll send you more.
Jerry, I think we had Hey, Jerry, I think we had a little bit of a technical difficulty there. It's about the last 15 seconds. So I don't know if you want to repeat part of that story. That'd be great.
Okay. Well, as I said, Herb reached his desk and handed me $2,000 in 20s, which is a lot of money if you think about it, a lot of bulk, and said,
Yeah.
"Here, there's more where that came from. If you're out of the road and you have to go someplace and take credit cards, you've always got cash, and we'll the rest of it to you by Western Union when you need it." So that was back in the days when you wired money. So
Sure.
it was an interesting experience. He took me down to Bunch Cadillac on Broadway at that time, put me in my brand new 67 Cadillac.
Ooh, deep rag.
DeVille.
Yeah.
It was like turquoise. And
Nice.
all of his cars were painted with his initials, which was Shelby, Sumter, Singleton. So it was the triple S. And we called them the pregnant swans because that's what they looked like. And I would take a box of records, a couple hundred records, 45s, very few LPs back in those days, because 45s were the big currency, because that's who bought records, were the jukebox operators. So they were the bulk of the sales. And I would hit the road and stay gone for 3 or 4 weeks at a time. I'd get up on Monday morning and go, I'm going to go northeast. And I would just look wherever my road took me. And we had what was called an SDS, the standard SRDS, standard rate and data, which was a massive phone book sized epistle that had every radio station by its format, because there was no internet, there was no going on and getting a GPS. I had enough maps to stock an atlas, and would drive around and stop at every little podunk radio station that I could find on my route and say, walk in and go, "Hi, I'm from Nashville." And they'd go, "Ah," and we'd have lunch. We'd go have hamburgers or something like that. And they would say, "What'd you bring?" And I'd show them the records, and they'd play them all. And that's how we made hits back in those days, was public contact with radio stations, one-on-one. And then we signed, he was going along and was having some moderate success with some local artist, and signed a little school teacher from Hendersonville. Her name was Jeannie something. Oh yes, Jeannie C. Riley.
Oh my
And he
goodness.
put out a record that was a shocker for the day. It was called Harper Riley PTA, where she got up and stormed into the PTA meeting and dissed them all because they had talked about her mini skirt. We were opposite back then, and the record ended up selling 6 million copies.
Wow.
It was one of the biggest. It was one of the biggest country hits ever. It went #1 everywhere, and it stayed #1.
Yeah, that was
in those days.
I remember those days.
Oh, yes. Those were the days where people paid their bills in cash, and I would come back into the office in a couple of weeks, and they'd be sitting there. Shelby be sitting there stacking money up. It's just amazing because
And she was from
independent distributors.
Yeah.
That's how things happen. Hired a guy, Leland Rogers. Remember his name for later on. He was a guy out of Texas, tall, skinny, lanky guy, but he was an R&B specialist. He got into the R&B business, and part of my job was to take people like Peggy Scott and JoJo Benson, which had a hit record called "Picking Wild Mountain Berries," and they were working in New Jersey, but JoJo didn't like airplanes. So we had them booked on the Dave Clark, the Dave Clark 5 TV show, which that was in Los Angeles.
Okay.
So I had to drive to New Jersey, pick them up at a club, take them to the airport, and we flew from Newark to Los Angeles just to do a half-hour TV show. We probably spent almost $1,000 in airfares. Back then, that was, you could fly to the West Coast for $300. So.
Well, yeah. Jerry, I got to ask you something here, because you were just talking about the Dave Clark actually having a show in Los Angeles.
Right.
I've never heard about Dave Clark. You're talking about the Dave Clark 5, right?
Yeah. They actually had a syndicated TV show. It lasted like I think it was on and off before anybody knew about it. So
okay, that's interesting. Okay,
but that
I
was,
just want to make sure I clarified that.
yeah,
I was hearing correctly.
I have looked all over the tube to find anything on that show, and I can't find anything. Your resources might be a little bit better.
Yeah, we're gonna check that out.
Yeah. So kind of we got along there pretty good for a while, but Nashville at that time was kind of coming of age. It was really starting to find its base, its feet, if you will. And there were companies just cropping up everywhere. And I got an offer to go to work for a brand new startup called Mega Records, MEGA. A guy named Brad McEwen was the vice president of RCA. And he decided, Chet Atkins is making all this money here. I can be doing the same thing. Chet Atkins, who was a great guitar player, was also the head of A&R for RCA.
Yeah.
Great ear. Man had a wonderful ear. And so Brad started his own label, Mega, and he signed a couple of acts, but he signed a little girl her name was Sammi Smith. She was from Oklahoma.
Yeah.
Just a sweet little girl. He called me up and said, I'd like you to come to work for us. I said, okay. He said, how much you making? So I told him. Oh, he said, we'll top that. And he said, you'll be the head of our country division. Well, I didn't know their country division was one. They didn't have anybody on the label at that point in time. They were just getting ready to do all this. Had a wonderful man named Jim Malloy who'd come over he'd been with Monument as a producer, and he decided he'd take a flyer and take a piece of the company.
Oh yeah.
And I said, so who are we looking at? And he said, well, a girl named Sammi Smith. I'd never heard of her, and neither had anybody else. So. And I said, when will I get the community? He said, well, she'll be coming by the office. And about that time, the phone rang, and he answered the phone. He said, hold on one second. He said, are you busy right this second? I said, no. He said, Sammi just got evicted from her apartment. Will you go pick her up?
Oh my gosh.
Well, she gave me the address over on 21st Avenue in Nashville. And the first time I saw Sammi Smith, she was sitting on an orange crate on the curb in front of an apartment building. She had paid her rent, and they kicked her out.
Oh my gosh.
I was renting a 3-bedroom house, and I said, well, I've got a spare bedroom if you want to crash. And so I took her to my house, and we had a very professional relationship. Let me make sure I put that in here. So,
sure.
And we lived together, I guess, the entire time she was with Mega and I was with Mega. She never paid me any rent either, as far as I remember. And the only thing I do remember, she borrowed my Cadillac at that time. I had gotten hooked on Cadillacs.
Yeah.
It's a Nashville thing.
Sure.
And they had an emergency brake that you put on with your foot. And then when you put it in gear, it was supposed to release. Well, she had managed to jam it and drove around with the emergency brake on until she burned it out. So,
oh my God.
Yeah. So, and she had helped me make it through the night, which went #1 country, #1 in the adult, what they called easy listening back then, and #8 on the pop chart. It was the first country record. It was the first country record other than Hank Williams that ever had a pop hit. So we were really proud of that. And then we got covered by Ray Price, who was over on Columbia, and we had to fight the Columbia massive machine, but we actually beat Columbia to the top of the charts.
Yeah, wow.
And Ray Price didn't speak to her for a long, long time.
I bet. Now that song, who was that written by? Was that Chris Christopherson, or was it somebody else?
It was Chris Christopherson, yes, as a matter of fact. If I remember right. Okay, I could look it up on Wikipedia, but I think you're right.
Yeah,
but it had been done by Bobby Bear at one time, and it never got off the ground. So but it charted as things happen, as times come. If you think about "Help Me Make It Through the Night," when they cut that song, you could hear there was no fiddle, there were violins. It was just a huge, massive production, because that was the way the song was being carried. Okay, it lent itself to that. People loved it. They didn't care.
So Jerry, was that be considered? What was the sound that they talked about, the Nashville sound or whatever? Was it countrypolitan? I mean, what was that strings behind it?
Well, the true credit for that string thing should go to there was a A&R guy for Columbia Records, as a matter of fact, CBS. They had two labels, CBS and Columbia is the same company. named Billy Sherrill, who was a legend in the business. Okay. And Billy liked that sound. He first did that sound with Tammy Wynette, and her songs were just lush. It's the best word I could come up with. They weren't twang. There was the twang was there, but it was a sophisticated twang, and people and women loved it. And if you recall, they make all the decisions about music. If they
most things in life, right?
if they think it's a hit, it's a hit. Guys don't do it. The guys go, well, if they'll dance with us, okay.
That's right.
So it was a wonderful time to be in the music business. So, and being the way the business was, I couldn't stand working in one spot too long. So after a couple of hit records with Sammi, I took a job with a company called Cinnamon Records. And Cinnamon, I'm gonna blow his name. He's from Missouri. Oh, geez, shouldn't even have brought the story up. But we had a big hit. Narvel Feltz. I know. I have to go through I have to go through the flip cards. So.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That's right.
And we had a couple of big hits with him. The company went belly up, so we all didn't get paid. So I started kind of looking around, and I got a phone call from a guy named John Smith Jr., as a matter of fact.
Yeah.
And he said, we'd like to talk to you about, we're starting a country division, and we want somebody who knows the ins and outs of Nashville. We don't. So we want you to come. Could you come talk to us? And I said, okay, where are you at? He said, we're in Memphis, Tennessee. And I said, okay, that'll work for me. And I got in the car, and of course, back then I drove everywhere. I was what they called a road hog. So I wasn't happy unless I was driving a car and sleeping in a motel someplace, and going to see a radio station, staying up all night. So he said, we'll make reservations for you at the Holiday Inn on McLean Street, right off of Union, which is, I don't know if it's still there or not, to be honest with you.
It's gone. There's condos there now.
Oh my goodness. There's condos everywhere. So I drove to Memphis, checked into the hotel. They had a suite for me, which I thought was kind of cool. And went over to 98 North Avalon, which was it was just a door in the side of a building next to a bar.
Right.
So it's kind of a usual company. And of course, I knew a lot about Stax. I knew about all the records they'd had. So I walked upstairs, met the receptionist, and went back to John Smith's office. And he said, we want to start a country division. And I said, well, are you prepared to move me to Memphis? He said, oh, no, you'll stay at the Holiday Inn when you're in town, but we expect you to be in Nashville. And I said, but I've already rented an apartment here, because I knew I was going to get the job. And he said, well, we'll book you a room. Where would you like to stay in Nashville? And I said, why don't you get an office? He said, no, we're a Memphis company. We want them to know we're a Memphis company. So for the next 2 years, I got up every Monday morning at some ungodly hour and would drive to Nashville to check into the old King of the Road hotel down on First Avenue. It's now Clarion, by the way.
Oh, sure.
And it was called Roger Miller's King of the Road. And I would check into room 714. They kept the room for me 7 days a week.
Yeah.
And I would work the row and go around and see people at the trade magazines. And that we had, at that time, we had Record World, Cashbox, and of course, Billboard all had offices in Nashville. Sure. Cashbox is gone, by the way, and so is Record World. Billboard's still there. Wow. The competition kind of ran them away. And I would go in, and we signed an act named O.B. McClinton.
Oh, yeah.
It was from Senatobi, O.B. from Senatobi, Mississippi. And he had written hits for many R&B artists. And they wanted to cut him in the Stax Studios. And I said, can't do that. You've got to take him to Nashville to get that sound. You don't send a painter to do a carpenter's work. Okay, you're doing wonderful. The Stax Studios had so many hits that had come out of there.
Yeah. And
I would hang out down at the studio to kind of get a feel for what was going on, which was a good thing because I met a lot of people. And Isaac Hayes walked in one day and said, "Hey, wow."
Oh.
I'm a little starstruck too, but So we went into the Monument Studios back then, which Monument Records also owned a studio down on Music Row. And we put out a couple of country records on Obi, and they just, when you're trying to, back in those days, when you're trying to make hits in a genre, we had Charlie Pride, who had taken years to break through as a star. Yeah. And here we came with Obie McClinton, who was a black gentleman from Mississippi, and they were just not buying the sound. So I was sitting talking to his engineer, and he said, "We got to come up with some kind of an idea here." And I said, country radio fans don't listen to other types of music, other genres. I said, so why don't we find something that's kind of catchy? And so he threw some ideas, and I don't really know which one of us came up with it, but there had been a big hit R&B record that crossed over into the pop side called "Don't Let the Green Grass Fool You." Mm-hmm. We put it out, and people went nuts over it. They had never heard it, but they thought it was the greatest thing since sliced bread. And we sold the dickens out of it. He put out an album, and it did very, very well. Yeah. And we had a very good run. I had about a 2-year run with him, and I had my office in Memphis, and I had my hotel room in Nashville, and I left Stax at that time. I got a phone call from Nashville from a gentleman named Jack Messler, who was my best friend for years. Jack passed on, unfortunately. And he said, "You ready to come back to Nashville?" He said, "Well," I said, "So doing what?" He said, "Well, I'm the sales director for United Artists Records, and I need a good promotion guy, and I get good reports about you." Now, coming from a job where we only had one hit record, I guess we made some noise. Yeah. And I said, "Well, I'm living in Memphis." He said, "That's okay. I said, "But I come to Nashville every week." And he said, "Well, you'll need to move here because we can't do this." But I actually drove back and forth from Memphis to Nashville for about 3 months to see if the job was going to work out.
Oh, sure. And
I became the national promotion director for United Artists Country Division in Nashville. They were down on Music Row, of course. Yeah. I mentioned that Stax was upstairs over a bar, and I used to go down there at happy hour because I enjoy a little bit of the grape. And when I was staying at the King of the Road, Don Davis was the manager, came up to me and he said, "We got to do something with our upstairs." They had an upstairs bar. They called it the rooftop bar. And it was, I guess about 3,000 or 4,000. No, it's more than 5,000 square feet. So it had a big dance floor, and they had a jazz trio called the Nashville Jazz Trio. Where jazz artists are sometimes not so creative when it comes to naming themselves. And you could have shot off a cannon and not hit anybody. And he said, "We're going to put somebody in there." And I said, "I got an idea for you if you want to try it." I said, there's an act that played over at 98 North Avalon. And he played covers. Nothing but cover oldies. And I said, the place was packed every night. And he said, "Well, I can't go to Memphis just to see him." I said, "He's actually playing a club here in Nashville, which was a gay club over on Hayes Street, 1717 Hayes." And I said, "If you'll go with me, I'll go over there," because I didn't want anybody to get the wrong idea. And he said, "Let's go." So we got up, got in my car and drove over to 1717 Hayes. And he sat through one set and went up to the guy who was playing and said, "When do you finish this gig?" He said, "Saturday night's our last night." He said, "You want to start at our place Monday for 2 weeks?" And Ronnie Millsap said, "Sure, why not?"
Nice. So Ronnie was part of that trio.
Yeah. No. Ronnie had his own band.
Oh, so, Ronnie had his own band. Okay.
Yeah, his own band. And so he stayed for 2 weeks. They renewed him for 2 weeks. They renewed him for a year, and he stayed at the King of the Road playing 5 nights a week for a year. And a friend of mine named Bill McLean, who was with RCA, said, "Man," he said, "who's this act I keep hearing about?" And I said, "Who are you talking about?" He said, "Ronnie Millsap." And I said, "Well, he's a great act, Bill. I mean, he really can fill up a room, but he plays cover tunes." He said, "Well, where do you think he could be a great country act?" And I went, Oh no, he's a cover band. He'll never sell. So several months later, we were sitting at the King of the Road, and Frank Mancini, who was the head of A&R for RCA out of New York, sitting next to me. He's Harry Mancini's brother, by the way.
Oh, okay.
And and we were sitting there, and he leaned over and said, "So how's that lack of sales doing for us, Jerry?"
What a joker.
I got that rubbed. I got my face rubbed in that for a very, very long time. I was in Atlanta, Georgia, several months later because I had Dottie West was playing on a show that was opening for Ronnie Milsap, as a matter of fact, on a show. She had not had her stardom back yet, so I was down there, and Ronnie's manager came over to me and said, "Hey, I need a favor," and I said, and this was they did this on purpose. He said, "Our MC is not going to be able to make it here. Could you possibly introduce Ronnie?" And I went, "Oh," and it was all just a little payback. But being a fair sport, I'm not going to say a good sport, I went out and gave him a great introduction, and he went on and did the usual fabulous show that he and I are still kind of pen pals to this day. So he's really a good guy. So
yeah,
you like to see success stories like that, and you like to have been a little bit a part of it. So even if you were on the negative side.
Yeah. What year was that you were talking about as far as?
That's 70, 71, maybe 72. Okay.
Yeah, because I was thinking back because I remember my mother and father coming over to Memphis to watch this blind gentleman who played piano, sang great. Yeah. And it was Ronnie Milsap. And I thought it was around 71, 72 that they were going over to, I think it was off of Brooks Road. And
yeah, he was playing. He also played the Holiday Inn downtown, the one that sits right on the Mississippi River. I can't remember what.
Oh, the Rivermont.
Rivermont, yeah, Holiday Rivermont. He used to play there because your mother and I, and I guess I might as well say this out loud. Mark's mother and I were married for a long time.
Sure.
We actually shared the story one night. I said, "I saw you at the Holiday Inn Rivermont because your dad used to love to take her there."
Yep,
so actually, right. I knew your mother many, many moons before I ever got to meet your mother. So
yeah, that's right.
Just showing that the music business is a very small world. So.
That's right.
So we were at United Artists and kind of rocking along, having some real good successes. We had Gene Shepard, who was a very traditional country act, signed a young lady again from Oklahoma named Billie Jo Spears.
Yep.
Who Ray Price and I seem to run into each other all the time because we put out a record called Blanket on the Ground, which he also put out. And so I never got many Christmas cards from Ray, and it was just happenstance. And Blanket on the Ground was also originally released by Bobby Bear, as a matter of fact, and it charted, but it just didn't have the legs. Larry Butler was the producer. He was the A&R director for United Artists. One of the most talented men I've ever had the pleasure to know. One of the most talented people in the industry. He was a piano player who he could write, he could sing, he could play wonderful piano. We used to use George Ritchie as a piano player on all of our sessions. And he and Larry was the producer, and they would argue over how the best way for the piano to sound. It was interesting, creative juices flowing.
Oh, absolutely.
Way of saying it.
Yeah, absolutely. Huh.
But we had the UA sound, which was that lush string sound. Also, Larry loved violins. He loved just doing things that would kind of get people to go, "What?" But it would sell, So. Billie Jo had several albums. All of them were very good sellers. She never matched the success that she had with Blanket on the Ground, but she had a really good run, and she was the most down-to-earth person I ever saw in the industry. She never lost her background.
Well,
she always remember.
During our time in Hendersonville, when we lived up in Hendersonville, and had a chance to meet a lot of country music stars because their kids were going to school with me, they're in Hendersonville High. And the thing is, I did have a chance to meet a lot of those stars. I mean, not to sound like I'm tooting the horn or anything, but it's they were just great people. They were just like you and I talking right now. They just, you would see them rolling the carts down in the like grocery stores, like Kroger. They just didn't live behind the walls of a man.
People outside of Nashville don't really understand what the relationship is with the artists that are from here. You lived in Hendersonville, which is on the north side of Nashville. It's a suburb. At that time, that's where everybody in the country music business lived. Now they live in Brentwood, which is on the south side. So
went south.
But they lived where the boats were because Old Hickory Lake was up there. So that's where they wanted to be. Sure. And I remember when I first moved to Nashville, I had a lot of hair back then. I know that may come as a shock. And it got cut every week at Clyde's Music City Barbershop, because if you were in the music business, you went to Clyde's Music City Barbershop.
Where was it located?
It was in Green Hills. It was off of 21st Avenue. If anybody from Nashville remembers this, there was a Crystal on one side of the street. There was a furniture store on the other side of the street, and it was in the back of the furniture store down in a parking lot, and you had to know it was there to find it. But anybody that was in the music business knew it. And I got a phone call, and the office I had told my office I was going to Clyde's. Well, Clyde's phone rang, and he said, "Hold on one second." He said, "Hey, Jerry, it's for you." And I said, "Hello." And it was a friend of mine from Chicago I'd gone to high school with. He was just calling up to be sociable. And I said, "Listen, I'm getting my hair cut." "Oh, tell me about Nashville. Tell me about Nashville." And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" "Well, have you met any stars?" And I went, "Well, sort of." He said, "Well, who have you met?" I said, "Johnny Cash." And he said, "Where'd you meet him?" I said, "He's in the next chair getting his hair cut. Can I go now?" And it was true. He said, "You want me to talk to him?" And I went, "No, it's okay."
So the man in black was getting his pompadour cut.
Getting his hair cut, Yeah. Well, back then we used a little more gel than we do now.
Was it pomade or something like that? What was it?
Yeah. It was. Yeah. You had to put a lot of stuff on the hairdos we had back then.
Industrial strength, gel.
Yeah. Well, what you say industrial strength. We once said that Bobby Goldsboro used. If anybody remembers Bobby Goldsboro, he had that little butch cut and sideburns down to here, and somebody said, "I wonder what he puts on those things," because his hair wouldn't move. And I said, I actually made the statement. I said, in a wind, one time he broke off a sideburn.
Just went flying away.
And Bobby was one of our acts, by the way. At that time, we had Bobby Goldsboro. We had the Nitty Gritty Dirt Band, with A Circle Be Unbroken was a triple platinum album, which was a monster sale back in those days. It was, and it was across the board. It got played on every formatted radio station in the United States, even the adult contemporary stations, the easy listening segment.
Oh, sure.
We're playing because it was just if you think about it, well, The Circle Be Unbroken was actually one of the first Americana records that was actually. Today, it's played on all the Americana stations around as an oldie. I'm going, I'm not sure what that means anymore. So sometimes we act like we're embarrassed to call it country. So it's we made a lot of money with that. I got a phone call in 1977 from Leland Rogers, who had worked with me. And he said, "My brother's looking for a record deal." And I went, "Who's your brother?" He says, "Kenny." I went, "As in Rogers?" as in the first edition? Yeah. Right. Well, I'm a fan, if nothing else, in the business. Okay. I love people. I love the people themselves. Yeah. And he said, "Yeah." He says, they're breaking up. Well, I walked into Larry Butler's office, and I said, "We got a shot at something here." He said, I said, "Kenny Rogers is leaving Warner Brothers because the first edition is breaking up. We're not supposed to tell anybody because he's trying to negotiate a deal." And he said, "He's a has-been." And I said, "No, he's not." I said, "Country music is moving in a direction. You know it." And he said, "It'll be a hard sell." And I said, well, I guess that's what you pay me for." My good friend Jack Messler said, "You've lost your mind." So Kenny came to town and came over to see us. and he brought us a demo that he had cut. And he said, and I said, what is it? We had instant chemistry because Kenny's probably was the most down to earth person I have ever met to be as big as he got.
Yeah.
And he is the best businessman I've ever met, by the way. He didn't get a dime without saying, I can make this into a quarter some way. Okay. And he said, I took this gospel song he said, here's the good part. It's public domain, which means that there's no copyright on it and there's no publishing on it. He said, so we can keep all the money. He said, and I kind of added a country twist to it. And I said, what is that? Now, I was raised in a Southern gospel church. So when he said, love lifted me, I knew the words instantly. And he said, the first lines of it are, if I take a song from the Bible, take a line from the Bible and make it into a song. And then I can tell you how much I love you. And so Larry he played it, and I could see the light go on, literally, because Larry had an ear that was gold. Okay. And he said, we're going in the studio and cut this tonight. And they did. He called George Ritchie, and he called, not Buzz Cason, he'll come to me. And they rounded up the musicians, and they all said, because Larry Kate wanted you to cut on a session. There was something going on. Yeah. And so he had them in the studio that night, and they cut that song that night, and they had to come up with a B-side. He'd never figured out. So Larry and Kenny wrote a B-side that night. So that's the B-side, and I couldn't remember it to save my soul. Yeah. But they also cut a couple of other songs that night because you got the studio for 3 hours. So they went ahead and cut 4 songs. So they had to start on an album just in case. And we put the record out in about a week. And it went to number 8 on the country charts. It charted in the lower 90s on the pop charts, and it did a little bit in the middle. But we knew we had something, okay? And then I got a phone call from Wesley Rose, and Wesley Rose was the Rose of Acuff Rose, which was one of the largest publishing companies in Nashville, and very very fine conservative gentleman. Yeah. We were all running around blue jeans and cowboy boots. Wesley was wearing 3-piece suits because that's the way he was raised. And he called me up, and Wesley had just given me a glass pitcher for Christmas, and I thought we were friends. And then he called me up and said, Jerry, Wesley Rose. I said, Mr. Rose, I understood you cut one of our songs. I went, well, I don't think so. He said, didn't Kenny Rogers have a pretty good record going here with Love Lifted Me? I said, yeah, but it's public domain. He says, no, it's not. He said, we've had that publishing right for about 30 years now.
Oh my gosh.
Now there's a thing that goes on in the publishing when publishers want their songs recorded, so that's how they get paid. They get royalties on the play, and they get royalties on the sales. And it'll run anywhere from 2 cents to a dime. Well, if they want you to cut it, they usually will negotiate a deal. Wesley, I said, well, see, what kind of a rate can we get? He went, rate on a song that's already out? I don't think so. Oh, you could take it back off the market. I'll get back to you, Larry. Oops.
Over the barrel.
He made a lot of money. So we went ahead to have several hits, and everybody knows what all the hits that we had with Kenny Rogers. He became a giant, and he reached out to Dottie West and said, whose career had kind of not floundered, she had reached a flat spot in her career, as artists do, because the new acts were here, and he said, I need you to record with me. We're gonna do a duet. When Two Fools Collide, written by a lady named Jan Dyer. Matter of fact, who lives in Beaumont, Texas. She'll love the plug, by the way. And so she also opened for Kenny on his shows and then sang with him on the shows, and her career just got better and better and better and better. That was a good way to go, and it was just a very good period of time. And then Roger Bowling and Hank, I can't remember his last name, came in with Paul Ritchie. They had this record this song that they had written about a bus station, about a bar up in Toledo, Ohio. And Kenny loved the song, and he put out Lucille. He picked a fine time to leave me, Lucille.
Yeah.
It sold 6 million records. Then he followed up with The Gambler. And it was the biggest LP sale. LP for those who don't have LPs anymore. Long playing records, the big ones.
Oh, that's right.
It went quadruple platinum. Now, a million seller means it sold $1 million worth of records. A platinum means it sold 1 million records. So a platinum sells a lot more than a million seller. So, and it went quadruple platinum. I have it hanging on my bedroom wall upstairs. My wife keeps saying, "Get that thing down and put her away someplace." You know, so got to cover up something with something. So, and it was one of the best runs we ever had. Larry left the company and went independent, which means he made a lot more money after that.
Yeah.
Jack Messler was second in command. He got transferred to Atlanta to work for a independent company called Heiliger Brothers. And I ended up as vice president of United Artists. And that's where I finished my career, as a matter of fact. I ran the company I ran the division throughout that part of the era, if you will, and saw so many changes come upon the industry. We went from analog recording to digital recording. We went from reel to no tape at all. You know, stuff in the studio was just being done directly to disc or directly to chip, so to speak.
Yeah.
Went from 8 tracks to 16 tracks to 32 to 64 tracks. And then we started being able to doctor the sound to where people didn't have to sound bad just because they couldn't sing. They could be stars.
Yeah.
And it was kind of time to get on with the other part of my life, to be honest with you. People started dying. Drugs became a big part of the industry, unfortunately. I got a phone call that Jack Messler was dying of congestive heart failure from too much fun. It's sad to say. And I came back from his funeral and called the legal department in Los Angeles and said, I don't want to play anymore. Pay me out.
Pay me out. And
Pay me out. And
that's
how I rang down the curtain on that end of the industry. I stayed for 2 more years working out of my house because the severance they had to pay me, I didn't need to work. So I worked independently and was paid by independent record people and worked in my swim trunks sitting in the house. And finally I got an offer from a real company that wanted me to move into I call it the civilian sector. And that's where I've been ever since.
Oh,
so
that's great.
It was a wonderful opportunity for us to change the world through what we did. And we did it very, very well. We made a lot of people a lot of money. We kept a lot of people in working that couldn't work. We made a lot of success stories out of people that nobody else saw anything in. You know, they were cast-offs. Your last record didn't sell, so I'll get me a new artist. And we would take those people, and it was, you know, a good country artist could work for the rest of his life on one hit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But he won't work well. But if he gets another hit and another hit, he can have a very steady income. You don't see that anymore. It's kind of gone away, you know.
Yeah, no, I think that's where we'll end our session today. You know, it's just, I think that's a great way to end that part of it. We'll definitely have you come back for a 3rd chapter, and we'll talk about some things, some other miscellaneous items and things of that nature.
So many things I didn't even touch the surface.
Oh, exactly. So we got plenty of more episodes to record for sure. But listen, we love you, and take care, and we'll talk to you soon. Okay.
Thanks for the opportunity.
You betcha. Anytime. Take care.
Bye-bye.